fundamentally, the SDR didn't add up. They were short, 28 billion or something, or 13 billion.
28, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so, you either don't have an army or you don't have a GCAP, basically. That's
the fighter plane, yeah.
Yeah, it was always a very, very simple equation.
If the government does find this extra money for defence, how should they spend it? And one of the things you often hear in this debate, particularly from those who don't want to spend more on the military, is that the country wastes a lot of money on mismanaged defence projects. And one criticism that we've heard is that current plans commit too much to old tech and not enough to the so-called sunrise capabilities like drones and AI. Well, we're joined now by Ben Moores, who served as a defence procurement advisor to various defence secretaries over the past 6 years. Welcome to Times Radio, Ben.
Thank you.
What do you think we're getting right, and where do you see the room for improvement?
If you really want to save money and improve things drastically, you can improve it by about 20% immediately by living within your means. That is the fundamental underlying cause of all the waste in the Ministry of Defence. It's where ambition doesn't meet funding.
Tell me more.
So in effect, if you set a headmark of the capabilities you're going to achieve within, say, an SDR or whatever document you want to do it, and then you don't fund that, what happens is you have a load of people in the MOD who are going out to buy equipment, set up infrastructure, start training people, and those programs never come to pass. So you've got thousands of people basically doing projects that will never get funded.
Right. And a tendency to do what I've heard called in Whitehall moving to the right, stretching out the spend on projects, presumably for budgetary reasons, just makes that worse, does it?
Invariably, because you have to reopen all the contracts.
Right. Now let's talk about the direction of travel now, the defence investment plan. A lot of attention was given to a 5 billion investment in autonomous warfare and drones, like new warships to be built instead of a Type 83 air defence destroyer. In other words, to try and do things in innovative ways with fewer people. But at the same time, as that 5 billion was flagged up, we saw 8 billion going towards the new global combat aircraft, a new fighter jet for the RAF. Do you think that's the right balance of investment?
I think, look, fighter jets are like fairies, right? You either believe in them or you don't. And if you don't believe them, they die. So you either put the money in or you don't, because you've got a dead program. Like, if my personal view, you can debate either side of this about whether it would be useful, because fundamentally they're not building a fighter, they're building a long-range penetrating bomber. That's what they're really building. My personal view is it will fall over because they won't be able to afford it. So you'll end up spending a lot of money on something that never comes to pass. If you don't get the platform in by 2042, technology and the combat environment is going to change an enormous amount. You could buy F-35, which is $70 million a unit. Yeah, there are problems with it. Support costs are dreadful. Weapons integration is awful. But you've got an interim if you need it. Typhoon's still pretty punchy if you buy, upgrade the radar, and you could buy a load of CCAs to keep them going. So, I mean, look, there's lots of different ways to do it. But we tried to cancel that, and Number 10 blocked it.
Oh, really? Well, CCAs, just for listeners who don't know, they are collaborative combat aircraft. They're the ones without pilots in that fly alongside the ones with. Sorry, just pick up on that last point when you say you tried to put forward a plan to buy those, but Number 10 blocked it.
Well, fundamentally, the SDR didn't add up. They were short, 28 billion or something, or 13 billion.
28, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so, you either don't have an army or you don't have GCAP, basically. That
That's
was
the fighter plane, yeah.
Yeah, it was always a very, very simple equation. There was nowhere else you could go. Because contrary to the public narrative that there's loads of waste in defence, there isn't, and it hasn't really been since about 1994. It just doesn't really exist. Yeah, I mean, you could maybe save a couple of percent here and there and all the rest of it. But part of the problem in the Ministry of Defence as to why waste emerges is because we underfund a lot of these programmes to start with.
Yes.
So you end up going to these program teams, which is some old guy, an intern, and a dog.
When you say, look, obviously defence does have this reputation for misspending, but I sometimes look at HS2, NHS IT systems, new nuclear power stations, and think, well, is Britain in trouble with major projects more generally? Do you think MOD gets an unfair rap in that sense? You've certainly...
Massively.
Yeah.
Look, big complex programs. If you set a bar for a capability set and a requirement where the bit of capability had to meet multiple requirements across multiple scenario sets, you're going to have a complex piece of programming, and that is going to have big complex issues. And if you've underfunded that to start with, then you're going to start deferring it, then it's no wonder things, and you start pushing things to the right for in-year savings and everything else. The project teams are not allowed to say this out loud, but they just get continually hit by leaderships who won't live within their means and just want to announce new programs.
Yeah. Lastly, Ben, we're hearing also quite a bit of talk, I guess it's to do with garnering political support for additional spending, about buying British. Is that something you favour, or do you think it should be an absolutely clean sheet of paper with the best bid coming through?
Look, Levine had the view when he did one of the 13 major root and branch reforms in the last 30 years, that somehow you could deregulate everything, you could compete everything, and it just led to a massive train wreck. I mean, it's incoordinated. Modern warfare revolves around having packages of a capability that are fully integrated, and we've got none of that. We've just got a lot of people going out and buying the most expensive bit of kit they can, and then trying to justify it. It's been a total failure. Now, hopefully, the NAD can sort that out.
That's the National Armaments Director who's just been appointed.
With defence reform, but he needs to be funded properly. He needs to be backed properly. He needs to be given the people and the money. Look, there are places where you would want to compete stuff, but it also depends what kind of scenario sets you want to meet. Because if you think a war with Russia ends on day 12 and we all get turned into ash, well, okay, who cares, right? But if you think that may not happen, which I think it may not happen, or you find yourself in a situation with, like, say, Ukraine, where you need to be able to support someone with an industrial base and America blocks you from exporting its weapons, then you will need to build in the UK. Look, not all defence spending is helps growth, but some can dramatically help growth. It depends where you invest.
Thank you so much, Ben Moores, who advised several defence secretaries on defence procurement. And first up, who better than Sir Michael Fallon, who was a defence secretary under the Conservative government. Welcome to Times Radio, Sir Michael.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, you must have looked at this in the past year or two and been a little embarrassed, really, that the Labour government was committing cash more quickly and ramping it up than the Conservative one that you served.
Well, we've been increasing the defence budget under successive Secretaries of State ever since the invasion of Crimea. It was constricted after the end of the Cold War, right up to 2014. Ever since then, successive ministers and governments have been increasing it. But the argument now is we do need to go very much further. Back in my time, we were the second highest spender in NATO in Europe. We're now about the 12th. There are other countries, poorer than Britain, who are doing much more and much faster to meet the new NATO target. And I think that's the disappointment. We're losing our leadership role, and the new government and the new team, who I welcome, does not yet seem to be specifically committed to getting that spending up quick enough in order to keep pace with the threat and the amount of money that our colleagues in NATO are now spending themselves.
You're quite right about Britain falling down the league table, 12th place, as you say now, and they're in an even worse position on a chart of how much extra is being spent to meet those NATO targets. But what are we going to do about it? And, there'll still be quite a lot of people in the Labour Party, some of them call themselves welfare, not warfare activists, who are perfectly comfortable with us slipping down the league table. They'd rather spend the money on something else.
But I think what's changed, Mark, is the public concern now about defence. People can see the threat from Russia, the aggression that's been shown, not just in Ukraine, but closer to home with its ships, its cyber attacks, the interference with cables and all the rest of it. I think we see now that we do have to better protect ourselves, whether it's against international terrorism or Russian aggression on our own continent. And I think there's a wider political agreement about that. There was widespread agreement, across society, and the Defence Review that was published a year ago. And my only regret is, it's taken a year now to get the new plan out there, and we're still not quite sure about how and how quickly it's going to be funded.
What would you do? What are the options in terms of the finances?
Well, first of all, I think we need an early decision to when to meet the 3%. That's what John Healey resigned over. The 3.5% NATO target is by 2035. That's 9 years away. But Healey was very clear that we had to meet 3% in the immediate future. And we need a commitment from Andy Burnham as to when that's going to be met. Secondly, he's got to find the extra money that isn't in the defence investment plan. You referred to some $4 billion. There's some fairly heroic assumptions in that plan anyway about savings. So they've got to find some extra money for that. And then they've got to decide really how they're going to make sure this money is better spent. It doesn't just go on the really big programs to build submarines and fast jets, but it finds its way through to the medium size and the small defence that are waiting here to invest, and indeed the foreign investors who are waiting to invest in Britain, as they're now investing in Germany and in Poland and so on, to help rebuild our defences. So these are immediate decisions that have been stalled now for a year, which I hope the new team, and I welcome the new team, all three are different, new Prime Minister, new Chancellor, new Defence Secretary. I really hope they'll crack on that.
But let's just backtrack a little, Sir Michael, if we may. You haven't really said where a Conservative government would get the money from. I mean, it could be 10, 12 billion extra on top of the Defence Investment Plan cash in order to meet that figure you were talking about, which is 3% of our economic output by 2030. Where would the Conservatives get that money from?
Well, happily, I'm no longer a spokesman for the front bench. I'm no longer in Parliament. But I think the Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives have made it clear that they would certainly want to see greater savings right across government, and particularly in the welfare programmes. That the money is there to be spent. We're spending far more on welfare than we ever did, years and years ago, particularly at the height of the Cold War. And really, some programmes have got to be trimmed if we're going to be able to spend what we've committed to spend on defence.
Ending the pensions triple lock?
Well, that's something, each party's got to consider now as to where the greatest savings lie. And I'm quite sure that the Conservative opposition and the other parties, and indeed the Parliamentary Labour Party, will now be focused on, what is the priority? You can commit to all these spending programmes. You can commit to ending child poverty, to net zero, to all these things. I'm sure Ukraine would like to have done all these things. But first of all, you've got to defend your country properly. And therefore, security has to come before all these other programmes.
I was looking back at your time as Defence Secretary and the gap, for example, in ordering warships. And I think possibly you did, just towards the end. There were some frigates. I know we had a 17-year gap in ordering frigates, which is one of the reasons why the Navy's in such a state. Is there anything you regret from that time that you weren't able to push ahead with more quickly in order to recapitalise the forces that you should have done back then?
Well, certainly you want to make these programmes faster than they were. It takes far too long to build a ship or a submarine. I completed the 2 aircraft carriers. I started the new Type 26 frigate, and I started the work on the new lighter frigate, the Type 31. So that will certainly fill a gap. Could we have done it earlier? Quite possibly. What we've certainly got to do is to learn how to do it faster. And that means, looking again at how we build ships, building them like we did with the carriers in the end, building them in blocks rather than giving the whole thing to one particular yard, making our yards more productive. And, where necessary, bringing foreign expertise in and other sources of capital alongside the MOD budget. So, yes, of course, I think every Defence Secretary, regrets the length of time to build an armoured vehicle, a ship, an aircraft. These are huge programmes. And perhaps the other thing, the new government, a new team should be looking at is how you do more of these things in collaboration. We're now building a fast jet in collaboration with Italy. There are agreements in the offing with Poland and perhaps now with Germany. And I think that is the future, that we do collaborate on a minilateral basis with other European countries, bringing our defence companies together so we can do these things faster between us.
There's sometimes a political tension, isn't there? We see the government setting out a buy British stall, as it were, and it would. Well, I would intuit that they think higher defence spending will be easier to sell to the Labour left if it directly benefits British jobs. I mean, that seems pretty logical, doesn't it? Where's the balance there, do you think? You mentioned the need to collaborate, but we've got to look after British jobs, haven't we, as well?
We do, but we've got to be careful about exactly that balance. You know, there are obviously capabilities that only the big American companies have, and we've got to be very careful, I think, about defining everything as British jobs. What really matters, if you're placing a British requirement, is that you not only, get direct British jobs in the yards and the factories and the plants, but you also get British jobs across the supply chain. And that's where I think they've got to be very careful about saying everything has got to be completely British. It might be that the contract goes to a Danish or a Dutch or a Nordic company, but actually the work is done. The manufacturing, the assembly, some of the high-end work is done here as well, and there are indirect benefits to our supply chain. So it can't just be everything has to be completely British. We've also got to be open and encourage other European and North American companies to come in here and do their stuff in Britain so that we maximise the benefits right across the supply chain.
Michael Fallon, former Defence Secretary, thank you very much indeed for joining us.